The phone vibrated at 2:17 a.m. Most calls at this hour brought nothing but bad news, but when I saw her name on the screen, I knew this wasn't just bad, it was worse. I answered immediately, my heart already racing. "Alex?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracking with fear. If you're enjoying this story so far, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more emotional narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships and resilience. The first time I met Ellie was at a coffee shop 3 years ago. She had been sitting alone, her fingers wrapped tightly around a mug that had long gone cold, staring out the window with such intensity that I wondered what she could possibly be looking for. I hadn't meant to stare, but something about her, the slight furrow between her brows, the way she seemed both present and 1,000 miles away, caught my attention. When she suddenly looked up and our eyes met, I expected her to look away. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't a full smile, just a slight upturn of her lips, a small acknowledgement that she had caught me watching her. I smiled back, embarrassed but unable to look away. Later, when I got up to leave, I noticed she was struggling with her laptop bag, trying to fit papers back inside while balancing her coffee. I offered to help, and she accepted with that same small smile. We introduced ourselves, and I learned her name was Ellie. She was a graphic designer who had just moved to the city for a new job. "Do you come here often?" she asked, and then immediately laughed at herself. "Sorry, that sounded like a terrible pickup line." "I do, actually," I replied, charmed by her self-awareness. "Every Tuesday and Thursday before work." "Then I guess I'll see you around, Alex," she said, shouldering her bag and walking toward the door. I watched her leave, wondering if she really would come back, or if this was just one of those fleeting connections that city life sometimes offers, brief, bright, and ultimately meaningless. But she did come back. The following Tuesday, she was there, sitting at the same table by the window. She waved when she saw me, and I joined her without hesitation. It became our routine, coffee on Tuesdays and Thursdays, conversations that started with work and the weather but gradually deepened into discussions about family, dreams, fears. I learned that Ellie had moved to the city not just for the job, but to escape a relationship that had run its course, as she put it. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. There was something in the way her eyes clouded over when she mentioned it that told me it was a wound still healing. We became friends, good friends, but nothing more. Not because I didn't feel something more, but because timing matters, and hers wasn't right. I respected that, valued our friendship too much to risk it. 6 months after we met, Ellie started dating someone new. His name was Ryan, and he was everything I wasn't, confident to the point of arrogance, successful in ways that were immediately visible, the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. "He's different," Ellie told me over coffee, her eyes bright with excitement. "He knows exactly what he wants and goes after it." I smiled and told her I was happy for her, ignoring the twinge in my chest. And I was happy for her. Ellie deserved someone who made her eyes light up like that. At first, Ryan seemed good for her. She glowed with a new confidence, talked about the future with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen before. Our coffee meetings became less frequent, understandable, given her new relationship, but when we did meet, she was full of stories about weekend trips and fancy restaurants. But then, subtly at first, things began to change. She would cancel our plans last minute, always with a perfectly reasonable excuse. When we did meet, she checked her phone constantly, as if afraid of missing a call or text. The bright enthusiasm in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a wariness that reminded me of how she'd looked that first day in the coffee shop. "Everything okay with Ryan?" I asked once, trying to sound casual. "Of course," she replied too quickly. "He's just particular about things. Likes things a certain way." I nodded, not pushing, but filed away the slight tension in her voice, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine. Months passed. Our coffee meetings dwindled to once a month, then stopped altogether. Ellie's social media, once filled with her artwork and silly selfies, became curated and sparse. When I texted, her responses were delayed and brief. I told myself she was just busy, that relationships change people's priorities, that it wasn't my place to interfere. Until that call at 2:17 a.m. "Alex?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracking with fear. "Ellie? What's wrong?" I was already sitting up in bed, fully alert. "Can you come get me?" He locked the door. The words tumbled out in a rush, followed by a shaky breath. I don't know what to do. I was already pulling on clothes, searching for my keys. "Where are you? Are you safe right now?" "I'm in the bathroom." He's been drinking. We had a fight. He's never locked me in before." Her voice broke on the last word. "I'm coming right now. Text me the address." I knew they had moved in together a few months ago, but I'd never been to their place. What if he hears me leave? "Stay on the phone with me. Is there a window you can climb out of?" There was a pause, then the sound of movement. "Maybe. It's small, but I think I can fit." "Good. Try that." I'm in my car now. I was racing down the stairs to the parking garage, heart pounding. I'll be there as fast as I can. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I listened as Ellie struggled with the window, her breathing labored and punctuated by muffled sobs. When she finally whispered, "I'm out," I felt a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. "I'm hiding behind the building now," she said. "Please hurry. I'm 5 minutes away." "Stay hidden, stay on the phone." When I pulled up to the address she'd sent, I spotted her immediately, a small figure huddled in the shadow of a dumpster, wearing what looked like pajama pants and a thin t-shirt despite the autumn chill. I pulled over and was out of the car in seconds. She looked up as I approached, her face pale in the streetlight. There was a bruise forming on her cheekbone, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Without a word, she stood and walked into my arms, her body trembling against mine. "I've got you," I murmured into her hair. "You're safe now." I helped her into the car, cranked up the heat, and drove away from that place as fast as legally possible. Neither of us spoke for several blocks. Ellie stared out the window, one hand pressed against her cheek, the other clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you want me to take you to the hospital? Or the police?" She shook her head. "No. Not tonight. I can't go back there." "You don't have to. Ever." I glanced at her, trying to gauge her reaction. "There's still room at my place. You can stay as long as you need." She turned to look at me then, really look at me for the first time that night. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and shame that broke my heart. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know who else to call." "Don't apologize. I'm glad you called me. Always call me." We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we reached my apartment, I showed her to the guest room, gave her some clean clothes to change into, and made her tea she didn't drink. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking small and lost, her hands wrapped around the mug just like they had been the first day I saw her. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, sitting beside her but careful not to crowd her space. She stared into her tea for a long moment before speaking. "It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, he made me feel special. Like I was the only person who mattered." I nodded, letting her talk at her own pace. "But then he started getting controlling. At first, it was little things. He didn't like certain clothes I wore. Thought my friends were a bad influence. Said my job took too much of my time." She took a shaky breath. "I kept making excuses for him. Telling myself he just cared about me, wanted what was best for me." Tears slid down her cheeks, and she wiped them away roughly. Tonight was the worst it's ever been. We were arguing about God, I don't even remember what started it. Something stupid. He was drunk, and he grabbed my phone, started going through my messages. Found our texts. My stomach dropped. Ellie, I'm so sorry. She shook her head. It's not your fault. He would have found something else to be angry about. He threw my phone against the wall, and when I tried to leave, he grabbed me. Her hand went to her cheek. When I locked myself in the bathroom, he said he was going to teach me a lesson. That's when he wedged a chair under the doorknob. Anger surged through me, hot and fierce, but I pushed it down. My feelings weren't important right now. You did the right thing, getting out of there. Did I? Her voice was small. I left everything behind. My clothes, my artwork, my laptop with all my client files. Things can be replaced, I said firmly. You can't. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in her expression shifted. Thank you, she said simply. For coming to get me. For not saying I told you so. I would never say that. Even though you were thinking it. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I wasn't thinking that at all, I said honestly. I was thinking how brave you are. She scoffed. Brave? I stayed with him for months after I knew I should leave. And then you did leave. That takes courage, Ellie. More than most people realize. She didn't respond, but some of the tension seemed to leave her shoulders. After a while, I stood up. Try to get some sleep. We can figure everything out tomorrow. As I turned to leave, she caught my hand. Alex? Would you mind staying? Just until I fall asleep? I sat back down, my hand still in hers. Of course. I stayed with her until her breathing evened out and her grip on my hand relaxed. Only then did I gently disentangle my fingers and return to my own room, where I lay awake for hours, replaying the night's events and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The next few days were a blur of practical matters. Ellie filed a police report and got a restraining order. We went to her apartment while Ryan was at work to collect her essential belongings, clothes, important documents, her backup hard drive. A police officer accompanied us, standing silently in the living room while Ellie moved quickly through the space she had once called home, avoiding looking at the photos on the walls or the evidence of the previous night's violence. I watched her carefully pack her art supplies, handling each brush and pencil with care despite her obvious anxiety. When she reached for a small ceramic figurine on her desk, a blue bird with delicate wings, her hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. He gave me this, she said, her voice hollow. On our first date. Said it reminded him of me because I was free-spirited. She laughed, a bitter sound that didn't suit her. Ironic, isn't it? Before I could respond, she placed the figurine back on the desk and turned away. Leave it, she said. I don't want anything he gave me. We left with 4 suitcases and a box of art supplies. As we drove away, I glanced at Ellie in the passenger seat. She was staring straight ahead, her profile etched with a determination I hadn't seen before. You okay? I asked. She nodded. I will be. The weeks that followed established a new routine. Ellie slept in my guest room, worked from my dining table, and gradually began to reclaim pieces of herself that had been suppressed during her relationship with Ryan. She started drawing again, not for clients, but for herself. Abstract pieces filled with jagged lines and dark colors that she didn't show me but that I glimpsed when passing by her open sketchbook. She had nightmares sometimes. I would wake to the sound of her crying out, and would find her sitting up in bed, eyes wide and unseeing. I learned to approach slowly, to speak softly, to sit with her until the fear subsided and she could lie back down. There were good days and bad days. On good days, we would cook dinner together, watch movies, even laugh. On bad days, she would barely speak, moving through the apartment like a ghost, flinching at sudden noises or movements. Ryan called incessantly at first, then sent emails, then flowers. Ellie blocked his number, filtered his emails to spam, and asked me to throw the flowers away without bringing them inside. When he showed up at my apartment one night, drunk and demanding to see her, I called the police while Ellie hid in the bathroom, shaking so badly I could hear her teeth chattering from across the apartment. After that incident, we discussed her moving to her own place, but the idea clearly terrified her. "Not yet," she said. "Please. I don't think I can be alone yet." "You can stay as long as you need," I assured her. "There's no rush." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to improve. Ellie started seeing a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse. She reconnected with friends she had lost touch with during her relationship with Ryan. She began taking on freelance design projects again, her confidence growing with each successful completion. 3 months after that middle-of-the-night phone call, Ellie came home, because my apartment had become her home, in a way, with a small potted plant. "For your windowsill," she said, placing it on the kitchen counter. "To thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me," I said, examining the plant, some kind of succulent with plump, star-shaped leaves. "I do, though." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I've been thinking a lot about what my therapist said about dependency. About how I went from depending on my ex before Ryan, to depending on Ryan, to depending on you." My heart sank a little. Was this her way of saying she was ready to move out? "But she also said there's a difference between dependency and interdependence," Ellie continued. "Dependency is unhealthy. Interdependence, relying on each other, supporting each other, that's what healthy relationships are built on." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I don't want to be dependent on you, Alex. But I do want to be in your life. If you want that too." The hope in her voice was unmistakable, and it mirrored the feeling expanding in my chest. "I do want that," I said. "Very much." She smiled then, not the small, guarded smile I had first seen in the coffee shop, but a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. Unless you want your guest room back, in which case we might need to have a different conversation." I laughed, relief and happiness bubbling up inside me. "The guest room is yours for as long as you want it. No pressure, no expectations." "Thank you." She stepped forward and hugged me, her arms wrapping around my waist, her head resting against my chest. I held her gently, marveling at how far we had come from that terrifying night. 6 months after Ellie moved in, we were no longer pretending it was temporary. She had painted the guest room a soft blue, hung her artwork on the walls, filled the closet with her clothes. We had settled into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, respecting each other's space, enjoying each other's company. Our relationship had evolved into something that defied easy categorization. We weren't just roommates, but we weren't dating either. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a deep connection that neither of us was ready to label or push beyond its current boundaries. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Ellie turned to me with a serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," I replied, curious about her sudden solemnity. "That night, when I called you, why did you come? We hadn't spoken in months. I had basically ghosted you for Ryan. You had every right to ignore that call." I considered her question carefully. "I came because you needed me," I said simply. "Because no matter how much time had passed, you were still important to me." She nodded, looking out at the city skyline as the last rays of sunlight painted the buildings in gold and pink. "I think about that night a lot. How different things might have been if you hadn't answered, or if I hadn't found the courage to call." "But you did call," I said softly. "That's what matters." "I almost didn't," she admitted. I sat in that bathroom for almost an hour before I picked up the phone. I was so ashamed. I kept thinking about all the warnings I'd ignored, all the friends I'd pushed away, including you. I convinced myself no one would want to help me after how I'd behaved. Ellie. No, let me finish. She turned to face me fully. I need to say this. When I finally called you, I was terrified you wouldn't answer. But you did, without hesitation. And when I asked if you could come get me, you didn't ask why or tell me I'd made my bed and should lie in it. You just came. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. That night changed everything for me. Not just because you helped me escape, but because you showed me what real care looks like. Not control disguised as protection. Not possession disguised as love. Just being there, without conditions. I reached for her hand, and she let me take it, her fingers curling around mine. I've been thinking, she continued, about what comes next. I've been healing, finding myself again. And I've realized something important. What's that? I asked, my heart beating a little faster. I'm not afraid anymore. A small smile played at her lips. Not of being alone, not of making my own decisions. And definitely not of Ryan. That's good, I said, genuinely happy for her progress. But there's something else I'm afraid of, she admitted, her grip on my hand tightening slightly. I'm afraid of not telling you how I feel. Of missing another chance. My breath caught in my throat. How do you feel? She looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day in the coffee shop. I just wasn't ready then. And then I made a lot of wrong turns. But now. She took a deep breath. Now I know what I want. And it's you, Alex. It's been you all along. For a moment, I couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotions I'd kept carefully contained for so long. It's okay if you don't feel the same way, she said quickly, misinterpreting my silence. I know our situation is complicated, and I would never want to pressure you or risk what we have. I leaned forward and kissed her, gently cutting off her words. When I pulled back, she was looking at me with wide, hopeful eyes. I've been in love with you since you caught me staring at you across that coffee shop, I confessed. But I needed you to find your way back to yourself first. I needed to know you were choosing me because you wanted to, not because you needed somewhere to go. I'm choosing you, she whispered. Not because I need you, but because I want you in my life. Because you make me better, happier, stronger. We kissed again as the last light faded from the sky, the city lights twinkling around us like stars. 1 year to the day after that middle-of-the-night phone call, Ellie and I stood together in our apartment, officially our apartment now, both names on the lease, hosting a small gathering of friends. The occasion was ostensibly to celebrate Ellie's first solo art exhibition, which had opened the previous week to enthusiastic reviews, but it was also a private anniversary for us, a marker of how far we had come. The apartment was filled with laughter and conversation, with people who had supported Ellie through her darkest times and new friends we had made together. Her artwork hung on the walls, no longer dark and jagged, but vibrant and complex, full of light and shadow in equal measure. As I watched her move through the room, confident and radiant, stopping to chat with each guest, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost overwhelmed me. This woman, who had found the courage to call for help in her darkest moment, who had rebuilt herself piece by piece, who had chosen to love again despite everything, she amazed me every day. Later, after the last guest had left and we were cleaning up together, Ellie paused with a wine glass in her hand, looking thoughtful. "What is it?" I asked, noticing her expression. "I was just thinking about how life can change so completely in a single moment," she said. "One phone call. One decision. One act of courage or kindness." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "That night, when I called you," she continued, "I was at my lowest point. I couldn't see any way forward. I felt trapped, not just in that bathroom, but in my life. She set down the glass and moved closer to me. But you answered. And you said there was still room at your place. There will always be room for you, I said, pulling her into my arms. She rested her head against my chest, and I could feel her smile. I know. That's what saved me, I think. Not just that you came to get me, but that you made space for me, space to heal, to find myself again, to choose my own path. I kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. You saved yourself, Ellie. You made the call. You climbed out that window. You did the hard work of healing. Maybe we saved each other, she suggested, looking up at me. You were pretty lonely before I moved in, you know. I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her words. I was. But I would have waited for you forever. You don't have to wait anymore, she said softly. I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere. As we finished cleaning up and got ready for bed, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks and difficult days, moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm us. But through it all, we had chosen each other, day after day, building something strong and beautiful from the ashes of what had been broken. That night, as Ellie slept peacefully beside me, I made a silent promise to myself and to her, that I would always answer when she called, that there would always be room for her in my life, that I would never take for granted the trust she had placed in me. Because sometimes, the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary decisions, answering a phone, offering help, making room for someone who needs it. And sometimes, those ordinary decisions can change everything. 5 years later, Ellie and I stood in the doorway of a small bedroom, watching as our 3-year-old daughter, Lily, slept surrounded by stuffed animals. The night light cast star-shaped patterns on the ceiling, and her gentle breathing filled the quiet room. She's finally asleep, Ellie whispered, leaning against me. I thought that story was never going to end. I chuckled softly. She gets her creativity from her mother. Ellie smiled, reaching for my hand as we quietly closed the door and moved to the living room. Our apartment was larger now. We had moved 2 years ago when Lily was on the way, but it still felt like home, filled with Ellie's artwork and our shared memories. As we settled on the couch, Ellie's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and her expression softened. The shelter just posted an update. Remember Maria, the woman who came in last month? She found an apartment, and she and her kids are moving in next week. Ellie had been volunteering at a domestic violence shelter for the past 3 years, using her experience to help other women find their way out of abusive relationships. She had also started a small foundation that provided emergency funds for women needing to escape dangerous situations, money for hotel rooms, new phones, transportation, the practical things that could make the difference between leaving and staying. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for this woman I had never met but whose struggle I understood through Ellie's work. She called me today, Ellie continued. Said she was scared about being on her own, about making it work. I told her what you told me, that she's braver than she knows, that she's already done the hardest part by leaving. I squeezed her hand, proud of the way she had transformed her pain into purpose, using her story to light the way for others. You know, she said thoughtfully, sometimes I think about how different things might have been if I hadn't called you that night. If I had stayed. But you didn't stay, I reminded her gently. You called. You left. She nodded, her eyes distant with memory. I did. And now I get to help other women make that same call, take that same step. She turned to me, her expression clearing. It doesn't erase what happened. Nothing can do that. But it gives it meaning, you know? Makes it part of a larger story. I did know. I had watched her transform over the years, not by forgetting or minimizing her experience, but by integrating it into the person she had become, strong, compassionate, determined to make a difference. I'm so proud of you, I said, the words inadequate for the depth of what I felt. She smiled, the same smile that had captivated me in that coffee shop all those years ago, but now filled with a confidence and peace that had been hard-won. "I'm proud of us," she replied. "Of what we've built together." Later that night, as we lay in bed, Ellie propped herself up on one elbow to look at me. "Do you ever regret it? Answering that call, taking me in, getting involved in all of this?" "Never," I said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment." She studied my face, as if searching for any hint of doubt. Finding none, she leaned down to kiss me softly. "Thank you," she whispered against my lips. "For answering. For coming to get me. For making room. Always," I promised. "There will always be room for you." As she settled against me, her head on my chest, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from that first meeting in the coffee shop, to that desperate late-night call, to this moment of quiet contentment. It hadn't been an easy road, but it had been ours, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. Because sometimes, the most important words we ever say are the simplest ones. "Can you come get me? I'm on my way. There's still room at my place." Words that, in the right moment, can change a life, or save one. And in the end, isn't that what love is really about? Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but being there when it matters most. Answering the call. Making room. Choosing each other, day after day, through darkness and light. As Ellie's breathing deepened into sleep, I made the same promise I had made countless times before, that I would always be there when she called, that there would always be room for her in my heart and in my life, that I would never take for granted the trust she had placed in me. Because some promises are meant to be kept forever. The end. If you enjoyed this story about courage, healing, and the power of being there for someone in their darkest moment, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships. Your support helps us continue creating content that touches hearts and reminds us of the strength we find in each other.